So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. My role here is to talk about the health effects of the nuclear industry. And I think that the nuclear industry has done a very good job of convincing our government and the public, perhaps the medical profession also, that, and particularly the Ontario government, that nuclear energy is clean and green and safe and inexpensive, and particularly the answer to climate change. And I don't believe any of those things. And particularly the health effects are remarkably under the radar for the medical profession, for the public, for journalists, and particularly for our government and policymakers. And that's what I want to talk about today, because I think the vast majority of people have no idea about the real health hazards and risks of this industry. So basically every step along the way in this industry, the real health effect, or every stage releases low-level radioactive emissions. Uranium mining, any mining, of course, is quite devastating environmentally. But the problem with the uranium mining is those tailings ponds are full of low-level radioactive waste that they pour water on to try, and they build little dams around it to try and contain it. But the truth is that very low-level radioactive substances are leaking into the air, the water, and the soil and contaminating it. The uranium that's then extracted is taken to Port Hope and refined there. And if anybody has been following what's been going on there, there is low-level radioactive residue all over the city, and it's very controversial as to how on earth they're going to remediate it and clean it up, if in fact that is possible. In addition, there's the massive dilemma of what to do with the spent fuel that comes out of the reactor, which is highly toxic, highly radioactive. Some of these substances have a half-life in the billions of years, so it's basically around forever. And nobody worldwide has ever figured out what to do with it. In the meantime, as we speak, it is piling up. Right now there's about 40,000 tons of it sitting in silos at the sites of the reactors, and nobody has any idea what to do with it. And in and of itself, I think that is a reason in and of itself to shut down this industry. It is unconscionable that we are putting this to future generations, not just our children and grandchildren, but we're talking thousands, if not millions of generations. Like I said, the half-life of this stuff is in the billions of years. But also, all reactors are leaking low-level, chronically low-level radioactive substances all the time. Little spills, little leaks, sometimes big ones, actually, that we don't hear about. And there is a lot of research that indicates that this is making people who live near reactors sick, and I think that's a real issue in Canada, in Ontario, because unlike the rest of the world, we built our reactors in the most populous region. Everywhere else builds them in rural areas, and we have them smack in the middle of the most populated area of the country. And if you include everyone downwind and downstream, that is a huge proportion of the population. And I'm going to get onto that in a minute. Included in health risks, of course, is an accident which Sean Patrick has discussed. And so I'm not going to get into that too much, other than that it would be a catastrophic health situation. There's also the issue of terrorism. And this is linked to this radioactive waste, because in the waste is plutonium, and that's what people use to make the bomb, the atom bomb. And this is what Iran is all about right now. I'm not going to get into this much, but this is a target for terrorism to steal this, or just to ram a plane into those silos, or actually into the reactor. Well, first I just want to explain, because I found it very complicated when I was trying to learn what exactly radioactivity is and why it's bad for you. Radioactivity, basically there are radioactive atoms that, what makes them radioactive is that they have this propensity to shoot off very short distance but very high speed tiny subatomic particles. If you were to ingest or inhale or absorb through your skin these radioactive particles, these atoms, They'll lodge in your tissues. They'll go through your circulatory system, lodge in your lung or your muscle or your brain, and then send off these tiny little particles which will damage the cells around them. If they land right inside your cells or inside the nucleus of your cells, they will shoot out and damage your DNA and your chromosomes. Acute radiation sickness is not very common. That's what happens when you have a big, huge blast of it, like in a accident. Like the workers, I believe there are some people that of those cleanup people in Fukushima that have died of acute radiation sickness, but also of the bomb. And that's pretty well understood. Depending on the dose you get, you're dead instantly, or in an hour, in a week, or 3 weeks, or whatever. But that DNA damage is the real insidious problem, because we know that DNA damage, those little particles damaging your DNA inside your nucleus of your cells, causes cancer. We know that. We've known for more than 100 years that radioactivity causes cancer. It causes many problems, but also cancer, or particularly cancer. If what's happening is a fetus, a pregnant woman is exposed, those particles get into the fetus, this can cause birth defects, which can manifest itself as miscarriage, stillbirth, or reduced fertility in people. We know radioactivity affects the immune system and can cause diabetes. We know for sure it speeds up atherosclerosis and causes heart disease. There's also problems with inheritable disease, and that's if it affects sperm and egg, and that may not manifest itself for several generations. So who is particularly vulnerable? Anybody that is growing fast, an embryo, a fetus, a child. For some reason that nobody understands, women are more sensitive to the effects of radioactivity than men. And within you, it's the fast-growing tissues, blood, gonads, bones, GI tract, and this is where the cancers are. And you have to remember, when you ingest or inhale those particles, you can't get rid of them. They have to go down their decay chain, where they shoot off those particles until they're finished. And for some of these elements, the half-life is a long, long, long time. So they're in you doing their damage for a long time. It's continuous and it's irreversible. So what does the research show? If you were to read the environmental assessment, which alludes almost not at all to health, it's remarkable in its absence. They keep saying that these chronic low-level emissions are perfectly safe. In the 80s, in the UK, there was a lot of kerfuffle around people living near nuclear facilities and children getting leukemia. People were starting to notice that there seemed to be a lot of kids that were getting leukemia. This prompted a whole lot of studies in the UK called the COMARE, which stands for Commission on Medical Aspects of Radioactivity in the Environment. And since then they've done many studies. The latest was the 14th report. So they decided to look at this. Very hard to study rare illnesses in small populations, like these were mostly rural areas. Nevertheless, they did find some disturbing trends of associations of children getting leukemia who live near these facilities. This prompted more studies also in Europe. A lot of them found mild associations. It's very hard to prove it. But then they came up with the KICK study, which is 4 words in German, which I can't remember. And that came out of Germany in 2008. And it's about as good a proof as you can get that the children living near nuclear facilities in Germany have higher rates of leukemia. Every single one of the 16 reactors that they studied, children under 5 living within 5 kilometers had an elevated risk of leukemia. And the conclusion of the government, who really didn't want to hear this, was that it sure looks like there's higher risk, but it couldn't be the low-level radioactivity emitting from them because it's too low. And the GeoCap study actually they replicated this study in France. Earlier this year it came out. Exactly the same thing. Children under 15 living 5 kilometers of all 19 nuclear reactors in France had elevated risk of leukemia. And others, these are the best studies, and it's about as good as you can get in terms of proof for this kind of thing. So what about Canada? Canada has hardly done any studies, even though we are probably the best people to do it because we have this fair-sized population around our reactors. The Durham study, which came out in 2007, is pretty well the only one. It's quite a big study, not a good methodology, lots and lots of problems with it. They looked at many, many diseases around Pickering and Darlington. And it's very hard to prove with this kind of study, which is not a robust methodology, lots of problems with it. But nevertheless, they did find some concerning results in terms of cancers, leukemia, thyroid cancer, Down syndrome. And their conclusion was, yes, this is worrisome, and we should follow up on it, but nobody's followed up on it. So that's all I'm going to say right now. But I would urge anybody who has any concern about this, you don't have to be an expert to request a submission, because this is something that the CNSC doesn't want to hear about and doesn't want you to know about, wants to keep under the radar, which they've done very well so far. But I think it's, aside from accidents, terrorist threats, toxic waste, lots of these things I've described, the health of the people living in the area is threatened with this proposal. Thank you.